Hi, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Tech Webinar Veterinary Series Part 2. I'm Heather Su, your host this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Any questions that you have throughout this session, please feel free to type them in the comment section and we will answer them after everyone's done their topics. Today joining us, we have Dr. Daniel Wilfred. He's special interest lies in small animals. Today, he's going to be speaking to us about gastrointestinal stasis, the silent killer of rabbits. We also, once again, are joined by Dr. Lee Y, founder of Pet Medic Malaysia and dog trainer specialist. She today will be sharing with us in Chinese about general knowledge of pet medicine. Lastly, joining us is Mr. Michael Zajac from Purina Regional Nutrition and Technical Educations Manager. He's going to speak to us about the understanding the pet food label and busting the myths on ingredients used in pet food. We will also later be joined by Dr. Pontic, pet nutritionist from Purina, to answer more questions for the viewers out there. Welcome everybody tonight.
Hello.
Hi. So without going anywhere further, let's start today's evening with gastrointestinal stasis. Dr. Daniel.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah? No problem.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me share my screen. Okay. Share the screen. Okay. Do you see my PowerPoint?
Perfect.
Okay. So let's start off with gastrointestinal stasis. It's actually one of the most common diseases that you're gonna find in the typical general bunny you keep at home. Rabbits outside. A lot of people ask if you find it in rabbits outside. Not really. I'll explain why later on. But this is generally a pet issue. Okay. Now the name of the disease is very self-explanatory. So you have the gastrointestinal tract, and it stops moving. Now, some basic information: the gastrointestinal tract moves like if you put a ball through a hose, and how you're gonna move that ball through the hose is you gotta press it, right? Move it up. Now it's the exact same thing. That's called peristaltic movement. Yeah. Okay. So just that imagine that ball moving through the hose and how you're pressing it. This is actually the same thing. Okay, so now I've simplified gastrointestinal stasis. You don't have to worry about the technical stuff. Okay, what essentially what the disease is slow moving gut. Now the typical average human being, their intestines would have that peristaltic movement. Movement about 5 to 12 times every minute. Rabbits have one movement per minute. There's a reason for it. So they ferment their food in their intestines, so they need to move it very, very slowly to allow it to ferment. Now, so in the beginning you have the slow moving gut, okay? And what happens when it moves too slowly is that when you ferment, you accumulate gas in the gastrointestinal tract. And you also have all this debris, which is ingesta, we call it food, going down, and slowly starts to slow down, and traffic jam, everything starts to move very slowly. And then you have this bloated abdomen where you have the gas building up, which I mentioned just now, and the food there. So if you actually felt the stomach of a rabbit who's having gastrointestinal stasis, you'd actually feel like a sandbag. You'd feel something soft and mushy inside. Then going on as gastrointestinal stasis goes on, the rabbit will find it very hard to poop, or you might not see any poop at all because everything's blocked already. There's not much movement, so naturally the poop can't come out the other end. And then, of course, the final bit, which usually they end up coming into the clinic for, would be lack of appetite, due to discomfort, pain. See them stretching out their bodies. That's essentially it. That's all you need to know about gastrointestinal stasis if you're a rabbit owner, or if you just want to know about it. Okay. Now we're going to go a bit more on the technical side. Okay, so I've crossed out the parts that you don't need to think about, because people see the whole gastrointestinal tract and then they get panicked. They say, "Oh, why so complicated?" Don't worry about it. So you have your stomach, going down small intestines, okay, going down, and you have a cecum. I'll explain what a cecum is later on. Then you have the colon, and then going down to the anus. Okay, so we're just going to talk about this part, this whole area here. Okay. Now, so from the stomach, of course, your rabbit eats his food, and then it goes down, and then it passes through the stomach. Okay, so they eat grass, hay, nuggets, not chicken nuggets. They eat pellets. The nuggets are pellets. Okay, they go down, and then they move on along the small intestine, and then they reach this really interesting thing called the cecum. Okay, the cecum is basically a junction. It's in between the large intestine and the small intestine. What happens here is that all this food that's being passed down, okay, it actually goes into the cecum and it makes this U-turn. And of course, same peristaltic movement, like I told you, that whole ball passing through the hose, okay, that same movement, your gut will move it down. I mean, the rabbit's gut, move it down and then come back up. Okay, when it comes back up, one of two things will happen. Either it becomes, if it's already fully digested, okay, it'll become a hard pellet, or it'll become a cecotroph. Okay, a cecotroph is, for those of you who have rabbits, you may have seen this. It's actually a wet sort of poop-looking thing. It might be bunched together, might be on its own, and if you're lucky or unlucky, depending on depending on you, you may see your rabbit eating it. I sometimes get clients coming in and saying, "Doctor, my rabbit is eating its poop." It's actually common. It's how they put the good bacteria and they redigest food that's not digested. Okay, so two things to take home from this whole structure is that they have digestible fiber and indigestible fiber. It's two things very important to remember. Yeah. Okay, going on. Now the actual disease. This is more of the interesting bit. Now you see Ray here. I got this picture from Great Lakes Rabbit Sanctuary. Ray here, you can see his abdomen's clearly bloated. He's a bit on the chubby side, and you can see how he's stretching out his body. This is very typical presentation for a rabbit that's not feeling good and is having gastrointestinal stasis. Also, some people refer to it as bloat. I've even heard some people call it bunny tummy, but we usually say gastrointestinal stasis. All right, if you take X-ray of this is actually Ray's X-ray. So what you can see here, you can see some buildup of food. You can see clearly gas. So this black stuff here is all just gas building up along the intestines. And this is the dorsal-ventral view or VD view, I can't tell. But this is all the gas building up. And what you'd actually see typically at home before it becomes what Ray is having, where it's so bloated, but it's just the beginning, is this guy right here. You see him extending his body, and you see a slightly bloated stomach, and you'll see him visibly in discomfort. You see the head tilt, he's just tired and not feeling too good. Okay, now the number one enemy for all veterinarians is pellets. So why we say it's our number one enemy is because, especially this is specifically to Malaysians. I know different countries tend to have different types of feed for their rabbit and whatnot. Specifically for Malaysians, I'm not saying that pellets are terrible. It's just that we tend to feed our rabbits too much pellets. So typically, actually most of my clients, I'd actually see their diet would be 100% pellets or maybe 80 to 70% pellets. That's not good. Now again, remember that digestible fiber and indigestible fiber. Indigestible fiber actually helps carry the food through, even though it's not being digested. Its function is to help carry all that food through. Digestible fiber is where all the nutrients and stuff come from. Okay, these things are broken down by the bacteria in the intestines all the way through. Okay, so this remember this as well, yeah. Pellets. Now, what typically carries down your intestines when you go to the doctor and you have a bad stomach ache or anything related to the gastrointestinal tract, they will always say drink a lot of water. Same goes with rabbits. They must always drink water. Some people actually have bunnies which drink out of bowls, which is also fine as long as they have constant amounts of water. But I prefer rabbits drinking from bottles because then you can measure how much your rabbit is having. And rabbits, when they start to have gastrointestinal stasis, because they have so much discomfort, they actually drink less water. Some owners will see, they'll come and tell me, oh, my rabbit's been drinking huge amounts of water. This typically is before gastrointestinal stasis comes on, where the rabbit's instinct says that I gotta consume a lot of water to help this stomach ache or this whole thing pass through. Okay, and also another thing, behavioral wise, just like dogs, you have some dogs who just hate drinking water. Even me, I forgot my bottle of water today, so it could be a behavioral thing where they don't drink as much water, and you gotta find a way to get your rabbit to drink more water. Okay, this is okay. Typically, if you have a rabbit and he goes in for a surgery or some sort of treatment or whatnot, they may come back, and then a week later you find that they fall very ill. This is typically due to stress. Rabbits do not handle stress well at all. Now, I'm going to start from the front. So, illness, trauma. So, illness would be usually what we find is that they develop gastrointestinal stasis after they have a bladder infection. So, they have a bladder infection, it's very painful. They just don't deal with pain very well, basically. So, adequate pain management when they leave the clinic, and also, what you can do at home, housing them maybe differently while they're recovering and things like that will really help. Loud noises. Oh, for Malaysians, we got so many public holidays. We every time there's firecrackers and fireworks and stuff, you always find one or two rabbits coming in with gastrointestinal stasis 2 to 3 days later. Usually, it's very typical. You can even predict it. And so it's always good if you're gonna hear a lot of loud noises or you're doing renovation in your house, whatnot. You gotta try to keep him isolated and try to dampen the sound as much as possible. And yeah, improper temperature regulation. I mean, then I think most people actually keep their bunnies indoors nowadays. But I generally suggest most of my owners to do that because you don't want other animals disturbing them. But also, our temperature here in Malaysia has recently been quite unpredictable, and it's been going quite high. So our bunnies are generally used to this specific temperature range, and the moment you go above it, even if they don't die from a heat stroke or they don't get, they don't come in with a heat stroke, they develop this whole really bad gastrointestinal stasis later on. So that's just something owners should think about as well. And also separation anxiety. A lot of owners are very attached to their bunnies and their bunnies are attached to them. If you decide to board them or maybe leave them with a friend or family member, you can actually find that the bunny actually gets very depressed. And what happens is that we've actually gotten calls and they say, oh, my bunny's really not feeling well. It's with my cousin or my friend, and then we usually tell them, okay, look, you got to bring him in, get the person to bring him in because we roughly know what might be happening. Okay. And then, okay, foreign body obstruction. Now, FBOs, they are not just bulky stuff, okay? They get stuck in your... Usually, rabbits tend to chew on fishing line, thread, things that are, long shaped things that kind of can get stuck in between in their gastrointestinal tract, and then it causes a lot of issues, basically. And it appears to be like bloat, and they do get bloated as well, but for different reasons, yeah? Okay? And do not treat any of these at home. It's really a big no-no. Okay, you can see the rabbit saying no there. It's not a good idea at all because it can end with very, very severe consequences. Okay, so you can just ignore the stuff at the bottom here. I just added a little bit extra stuff for any veterinarians watching. They can read through that. Now, generally, the time period you see for gastrointestinal stasis for the non-obstructive one over here on the left is that you're going to see an onset that's going to take some time. So you may see your rabbit slowly deteriorating. You might see that, he might even lose a bit of weight, might be very dehydrated over a period of time. And it'll be very obvious. You'll be able to tell, and you can see his stomach getting bloated, Usually, if you don't bring your animal in, if you put it off 2 to 5 days, you're gonna see a very, very severe form of gastrointestinal stasis, and they may even die the moment you bring them in, or the transport to the clinic itself might be very dangerous. Okay, and then of course this is the obstructive one, which I'm not going to touch on too much, but generally it'll be very fast, 24 to 48 hours, very severe dehydration. The rabbit becomes very pale. You touch his belly and he squirms. If you look very depressed, this might actually be where your veterinarian will suggest you to do an X-ray, because it might be a foreign body that's obstructing and causing your rabbit to become bloated. Okay, so treatment is actually quite simple, and we see this very often. It's a lot for the owner to do as well. So usually we prescribe metoclopramide cisapride in Malaysia. There's a few other medication overseas as well. We will give some pain medication to help with the whole inflammation in the gut, because everything is bloated, everything be very swollen inside there. Okay, and of course feeding, because they constantly need to be eating. Rabbits always need to be eating. So we will actually suggest some diets that are, you know, slurry based. They're a lot rich in water and stuff, and then you can feed that to them. If your rabbit is eating on his own but he's got a mild case of bloat, we may actually suggest you to give him a lot more leafy greens to help add water to the diet. And of course, the number one biggest influence is oral, intravenous or subcutaneous fluids. Of course, intravenous subcutaneous fluids will be given by a veterinarian, but you know, oral fluids you can give at home. You can just pump. Just give through a syringe, just pump, and then they'll readily drink, no problem. Okay. And last bit, recovery. And usually, once you start medication, fluids, all these things, you should see recovery in 12 hours. If he still seems very dull, refuses to eat after maybe 24 hours, you might want to go in for a second visit to see if there's any complications, because we're dealing with the intestines. They move a lot. They might even get tangled, might even get ileus and complications are basically, yeah. You might want to go in and check for that. And of course, if your pet required surgery, post-operative care, and you'll be briefed by a veterinarian how to care for it at home. Okay, so yeah, it'll take 5 days for gastrointestinal stasis to fully be solved. But generally 3 days, 2 days. I've even seen a day or day-ish. You know, if it's a mild case, they might recover. Okay, and then the last bit. I think I'm gonna go over my time a little bit. Okay, the last bit is diet. Okay, so diet, generally we actually, like I said, 80% hay, 20% pellets would be the ideal. Hay being Timothy hay. So treating your rabbits to sweet foods is usually something I discourage. If you want to give vegetables, that's great. Carrots, not such a good idea all the time. Once in a while, sure, because it's very high in sugar, and it messes with their fermentive capabilities. Their bacteria might might have bad bacteria growing more than good bacteria because of the sugar content. Okay, I think that's all. I think I just barely passed the 15-minute mark. All right, any questions?
Yeah, no, you're doing well. Thank you so much. My question is, would it make a difference if my bunny had a friend with him? Would it lessen on the symptoms when Chinese New Year
Okay.
comes around?
Oh, you mean are they as in if
Or
they're
would they
away
both go
or
and
if they're together at home?
yeah, if they're together at home, and I've basically padded everything as much as I can pad, but
Yeah,
they
yeah.
snuggle
The
together.
the
So
whole buddy thing
you
actually
know,
does work, even
they
for
still get
dogs.
a bit like
Yeah, so the whole buddy thing works, but generally it's still
okay,
down to the sound because
alright.
they both be scared together. That's unfortunate. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean we all go to sleep the next day.
No, no, no,
they don't
not
look so
really.
good. They look
Yeah.
quite petrified. Mhm. Okay, great. Yeah, so far, everyone's digesting
Was that
all
too
that.
much?
So maybe we can move on to the next question.
Okay, thank you.
It was really good. It was really good. Yes. Yeah, let's move on to our next presentation by Dr. Lee YY. And I will hit you back with some questions a little later on.
Okay.
Um,
Hi.
yeah, Dr. Lee, would you like to share your screen?
You'll be able to see. Can you see now?
Yes. Yes, we
Can you?
can.
Right. Great. Right. Well, I'm supposed to speak in Mandarin now. I was just wondering whether I should be that's what we promised, that we'll speak in Mandarin. So I feel a little bit awkward, but if you can't really understand what I say, I think I will also can explain it in English. OK，大家好，大家这里有没有一些说讲华语的朋友们？如果是有的话呢，我们今天呢，其实想要给你知道一下小小的医学小常识。OK，我们再分享一下，I switch it back a little bit. I actually put my PPT with English, just in case for people who do not read Mandarin. Right，你们知道猫猫和狗狗的心跳1分钟有多少次吗？你们会不会想说，其实根本就没有想过，为什么我需要知道，狗狗、猫猫的心跳，我自己宠物的心跳有多少呢？为什么呢？其实，如果狗狗心跳或者猫猫心跳太多，就是太快或者太慢，其实会对它们的健康是有一定的影响哦。然后，如果你其实可以更早的知道，其实它们的心跳有一点不正常的话，然后你早一点带去给兽医的话，可能也可以帮忙到兽医们做一些更早的调整哦。OK，在这个狗狗和猫猫的心跳率里面呢，呃，你们可以把这个写下。其实有很多很大的不同，如果你可以看到的话呢，真正的你去看，大概就是60到140之间。但是你会发现到呢，越小的狗狗呢，它的心跳率就越快，然后越大种的狗狗或者越大型的狗狗呢，它们的心跳率就会越慢，好不好？等一下呢，我会教你们怎么样去看你们狗狗的心跳率。然后通常我们要做这个心跳率的时候呢，通常我们很想你们在家里也学一学怎么样去测量他们这样子的心跳，好不好？这样当然越紧张的话呢，狗狗越紧张的话，它的心跳率就会更高。然后幼犬呢，baby 幼犬的话呢，小狗的话呢，它们的那个心跳可以去到200 beat per minute 那么多，就是200次，1分钟里面有200次。这样子其实呢，在1分钟里面，你要算200下呢，可能还没有到半分钟呢，你就已经忘了你自己算多少下。所以我建议你们呢，可以用15秒钟做定律。15秒钟里面有几次？那些15秒钟有20次，15秒钟有20次来说呢，你乘4的话，就变成80次了，就是80个心跳1分钟啊，可以吗？我猫猫主人呢，你们就要看这个成年猫和小猫也是一样的，小猫的这个心跳率呢就会比较高，然后成年猫的心跳率呢就会比较低。对不起，那个小猫的我写错了，其实是160到220哦。对不起，小猫的心跳率 kitten is 160 to 220 beats per minute。这样子，小猫的也一样，你就拿15秒钟来计算，15秒钟来计算，然后乘4，你就会发现到它们大概30、40个 beat per minute，OK 吗？这个有一个，你们可以把它给拍下来，然后你自己再看一看，这样子你会告诉我说什么是小型犬，什么是中型犬，什么是大型犬呢？像小型犬大概就是7、8公斤以下的，我们都叫小型犬。好像吉娃娃西施犬好像这个贵宾犬这些我们都属于小犬。中犬呢，就是好像我们平时的菜菜一些就是这个叫什么husky 然后大型犬呢，就是好像德国狼犬然后这个golden retriever然后 rottweiler 这一些呢我们都叫大型犬，好不好？然后 Saint Bernard 这些都叫大型犬。成年猫和小猫这个心跳率也不同。好了，我大概就跟大家说一说呢，你其实应该怎么样去做你这个测量这个心跳，好不好？我们今天没有小猫，我们就用小白来代替吧，好不好？这个是我们的小白 ，Paramedic 在上课用的这个小白。第一个呢，你就要看看你的左手边，你让你的手这样子，然后在这个腋下的这个地方，然后你这样子放，你用这2根手指在这里，然后你就可以 feel 到呢，那个心跳在你的那个身体上呢会打在你的手心 ，OK， 这里这样子就在腋下面而已 ，OK。大型犬呢可能就在里面一点，或者是高一点 然后如果是好像那个 German Shepherd 德国狼犬这样子，他们的那个心脏，他们的身体会比较尖下来，有没有？然后你就要可能要往后一点，或者是你把它的前脚啊，就这样子拉高，拉高，这样子它的前脚拉高，它这个胳膊是叫胳膊吗？elbow 这个 elbow 到的地方呢，就是那个心脏在于的地方了。然后如果你的狗狗有一点胖怎么办呢？然后呢，我们就可以看看这一个 ，OK， 你可以看看你用这个方法呢，怎么样把它狗狗量它的脉搏。This is what we call the pulse rate. You can't get the heart rate from here because your dog is a little bit more overweight. Then you can actually use the pulse rate. OK， 这里侧呢，大腿内侧artery 的这个地方，就在大腿内侧，在这两张相片呢，它就把那狗狗给睡下来，有没有？你其实可以让你狗狗这样子站直的时候呢，你这样子用2根手指往这个大腿的中间这样子 hold 着，你就会发现到在它中间那边呢，会有一个那个脉搏呢，会在弹在你的手心上面。一样样的道理，就用15秒钟来计算啊，然后你就可以拿到了。猫猫也一样 ，OK， 你就是然后如果可以的话呢，就让你在他们在休息中的时候拿这个脉搏是更好的。OK， 我们现在告诉你一点小知识，心跳加速的时候呢，心跳加速我们叫 tachycardia， 心跳加速的时候会常常有什么事情呢？这样当然，如果他们在运动方面啊，然后或者他们很害怕的时候呢，可能就会有这一个心跳加速的原因。OK， 但是如果他们在睡觉的时候心跳也在加速的话呢，很可能他们会有另外的病症哦，好像心脏病啊、贫血啊、他们脱水啦，或者是什么炎症之类的，sepsis 或者是胰脏炎，这一些呢，其实都是一些很重要的问题。你一知道了以后，如果你觉得他们的心跳率，哎，怎么样睡觉的时候也160啊？这样子的话呢，如果你的血钠瑞啊是睡觉的时候心跳也160的话，赶快带他去看兽医 ，OK？ 如果是太少了怎么办呢？哎，在睡觉的时候可能只有50多60的这个心跳率，而且它是小犬哦，它是一个贵宾犬，然后它只有大概50、60的这个心跳率的话，你也要注意哦。他们可能是一些很晚期的这个心脏衰竭，或者是他们在或者是他头骨有一些重到受伤啊，或者跌到，或者是被车撞到的时候呢，他有这个 head trauma， 这样子他的这个头脑里面的这个血压呢，就会这个颅内压呢就会上升，或者是甲状腺的问题也有可能。OK， 最后我要教你们的呢，就是怎么样算这个这个静息率 ，OK？ 静息率呢，我们也要找这个来看看哦。就是你让你的狗狗啊睡在这个这样子的情况之下呢，然后你的眼睛这样子的看，对着你的那个身体平平的时候这样子看，一上一下。有些时候是他的胸部 chest movement 或者是 abdominal movement， 这样子看的时候一上一下算一次。这样子为什么我们看静息呢？就是他在睡觉或者在很静的情况之下呢，他这样子的频率，因为有些时候啊，那这个呼吸的频率如果太高或者太低的话，也是有问题。尤其是太高的话，你也是要赶快去找你的兽医了吼。然后你会问我啊，Doctor， 这些呀、不都是医生的责任吗？他们静息呼吸的时候啊，狗狗大概是15到30也是可以啦。有些很大型的狗狗呢，可能可以去到10， 然后如果比较小型的狗狗可能去到30，猫的话呢就大多数于大概20到30。然后我就问你了，为什么要知道啊？通常不是兽医们的责任吗？你有没有发现到啊？如果是你去到兽医的时候啊，你的狗狗通常都会这样子了，还找什么这个进呼吸啊？When your pet go to a vet, most of the time they will be panting. They will be hyperventilating. You won't be able to know what's the resting respirate. So that let's not push to your vet. Let's do your resting breathing or resting breathing rate at home so that you can give your vet very precious information to let them know that what are they like at home. Are they like that? Are they actually have increase of respirate maybe about 45 at home instead of 30 for a poodle? Okay, so 这样子的话呢，你真的就可以帮忙你的兽医很大忙了，因为去到兽医店的时候根本就不知道是什么事了。OK， 最后我要让你知道，他们呼吸频率高的时候有问题吗？有些时候也是这样啊，运动啊，害怕痛啊，或者是气管收缩。这个气管狭窄呢，也是一个很紧急an emergency. Most of the time, when they're breathing, when they're panting, when they get cyanotic, this is actually very it's an emergency most of the time. So 他们就会或者有异物啊，或者有瘤给顶着这个气管，或者 simple as bronchitis and pneumonia， 他们这个也会弄到他的那个呼吸情形会比较高哦。OK， 我觉得今天就跟你们 share 到这里为止了，因为时间的关系呢，我们就只好做这样多。I'm done. I know all of you probably won't know what I'm talking about. I hope in the audience there are people who actually know what I'm talking about. Right.
Yeah, no problem. Today it seems that we have a silent audience. Yeah, everyone's kind of keeping their questions for the end. I hope, yes. Never mind. Let's move on to our next topic, understanding the pet food label and busting the myths of ingredients used in pet food. Mr. Michael, why don't you start us off with that?
Thank you. I just shared my screen. Hopefully it's visible.
Yes.
I must admit the pressure's on because everyone's down to the 15 minutes and I've got a feeling I'm going to talk too
So
much.
far.
So the pressure is on. Hello everyone. So today, so I'm going through pet food labeling and busting a little bit of myths. So I'll just jump straight into it. So I'm working on 2 screens. Hopefully it works. So with pet food packaging, a lot of people don't actually consider this, but the pet food packaging is technically a legal document, or it is actually a legal document. So there are a lot of requirements that are needed on pack, and it can vary from country to country. So some of the obvious things that you can find on pack are, for example, the pack name, the product claims, feeding guidelines. But then, for example, the variants, so whether it's for a kitten, an adult, a senior, but it could also be a special need, for example, a condition. So, for example, urinary condition, or if it's an indoor cat with special requirements. So on front of pack, there's also, for example, the main ingredient or the flavor. We'll also talk about that a little bit later on. Another important thing to look for or look at is the adequacy statement or regulatory standards. So for example, AFCO, which is the American pet food or American animal feed Association for America standards. You've also got the European Pet Food Industry Federation. So that's looking at regulatory standards for Europe. Also, Australia has one in Australia. But there's also other guidelines to consider, for example, local guidelines for pet industry. So not all countries are the same. So it can be a little bit difficult for packaging. So for example, for a couple of products, for example, for ProPlan, which is for Malaysia, it's made in Australia. Malaysia has different regulatory standards or legal requirements on pack. and India. So sometimes you'll find on pack different languages on pack. So for example, on ProPlan, some other competitor products, you'll see that there's English on the side. There's another country, or there could be 3 or 4 different, because different countries need to declare different ingredients. So for example, for India and versus Australia, Australia doesn't need to actually label any dairy derived ingredients, but for India you do have to. So if there's any traces of dairy, they'll have to label it as a milk product or a milk solid, for example. Then also the adequacy statement is also explaining if it is a complete and balanced diet. So on back of pack, this is usually, for example, if you think of it, if it's an occasional feed or if it's a complete and balanced diet. So if a package says it's a complete and balanced diet, it basically is telling you that it meets all the nutritional requirements for that animal, for that, whether it's a life stage or special needs. So for example, for this product on screen, it says it's an adult, so it meets all the nutritional requirements. But if it is, for example, an occasional feed or a complementary feed, this is considered as a treat because it doesn't meet all the nutritional requirements for that animal. So that's something to have a look at. So one thing is on pack that we're going to have a little bit closer look at is the ingredients panel. So this is, I guess, a section of the pack that has, I guess, a lot of debate and a lot of questions from consumer questions. We have consumer hotlines. We get hundreds of questions a day about this panel specifically. So here's an example from Purina O&E kitten. So there's a few things that we can look for. There's a few things to consider. So having a look at, for example, this pack, which says guaranteed analysis, you can sometimes find typical analysis. So there's 2 different ways that pet food manufacturer can put down nutritional ingredients. So if it's a guaranteed, you'll find, for example, here, hopefully you can see my cursor that says minimum. So what does that mean? Or for example, there should be a max. What does the max mean? So if it says, for example, crude protein, it's saying minimum. So there's going to be a guaranteed minimum. So it will never go less than 39%. And if it has max, so it's a guaranteed maximum of 12%. So this product is guaranteeing that it will never be more than 12%. So these are kind of things important. So for example, for sodium, you never want to go over a certain amount. And for example, for protein, you never want it to go below a certain amount. So moving down into the ingredients panel, one thing to consider is the way it's labeled. So again, the way it is labeled, for example, the ingredients is also set by regulatory standards and legal standards for country. But other things that we can consider is some ingredients are fixed, so that means they cannot change, and some are flexible or variable. So there's, sorry, I can't find a variable ingredient on this one, but if you've ever seen it on the back of pack where it has a generic term for example, a range of ingredients, for example, cereal, it basically, so for example, on this one, it says corn. So on this product, it has to have corn in it. Or for example, this one, a better example is whole grain wheat. So it needs to have whole grain wheat. We cannot change it with another ingredient. But for example, if it has cereal, cereal is a generic term for whether it's oats, whole grains, rice, it's a cereal. Then it can change. So if I put in, for example, instead of whole grain, I'll put cereal. That means that due to, for example, ingredient supply, whether we can't get oats for this batch, or we can swap it out with another ingredient. So the other thing is also to consider the way it is listed is in the quantities. So the higher it is up on the list means there's more of it. So for example, this one, poultry and poultry byproduct, it's higher on the list because that's the majority of the product. I was going to ask if there's any questions, but we'll hold them up to the end. So one other thing in regards to ingredients, but also flavor, which I mentioned earlier on. The way, for example, a pack's labeled on the front, whether it's made with or, for example, whether it's, for example, this product, which was Purina O&E salmon, or another product could be, for example, a product with salmon, or it could say, for example, flavored with salmon. These aren't, I guess, just made kind of chosen words. There's a reason for those words. So, for example, if a product for this one, for example, it's this one's chicken, but the example that we had earlier on. Sorry, just go back one more. For example, this product, which is Purina 1, it just has tuna. The reason for that is that, for example, this as being a dry product, it has to have at least 25% of the this product needs to be tuna. So by having it just tuna, it means that it has to have at least 25%. But then again, if something says with, for example, tuna, or for example, with beef, then there's a little bit less requirement. So it has to be more than 5% of that product needs to be beef, but less than 20% beef. Hopefully that all makes sense. Yeah. Other things also to consider, I'll just jump back. Jumping too much. Sorry about that. Why can't I go backwards? You can see on my presentation. Other things to consider is multiple protein sources. So when you're looking for pet food, you're looking for multiple protein sources, which gives you greater amino acid profile. So amino acids are the building blocks of life. Also looking for wholesome fat and also wholesome carbohydrates. Since you've already seen my presentation, I'll jump to this one. We're on the home stretch. So having a look at, for example, where the animal comes from. So for example, animal-based, it can be a lot of whether it's the muscle or the origin, so whether it's beef, chicken, cow, lamb, whatever, but it can also be the parts of the animal. So whether it's organ meats, tissue, whether it's kidneys, but it could also be the way it's manufactured. So for example, if it's a meat mill, or if it's an animal digest, and so on. The other one is plant-based. So plant-based is also very important, whether it's, for example, a protein source, carbohydrates, amino acids from protein, essential fatty acids. So for example, omega-3, omega-6, and a lot of vitamins and minerals. Okay, so on the last stretch, so ingredients always get a lot of questions from consumers and pet owners. So just to kind of wrap up what's on the labels, it's very important to basically understand, so not everything you can find on the pack. So it's always good to consult with a veterinarian. So if you've got particular requirements or you've got questions, seeking veterinary support is very important to making sure that it's the right ingredient selection and so on. The other thing is also, don't be afraid to call the actual manufacturer. So on the pack, you'll find the contact details for the consumer hotline. So with Purina, you'll find the Purina hotline. You can always give them a call to say, look, this product has X, Y, and Z ingredients. What does that entail? And I'd like to say that Purina, it does seem like we're a large company, but we're relatively a small team. So there's a good chance that if you do call the Malaysian hotline and they can't answer the question, they'll probably contact me, and you'll probably get a response from me as well. So hopefully, if there's anyone from Purina on the line, they will enjoy the 100 phone calls they'll be getting tomorrow morning. Okay, so with all these ingredients, the mythbusters, which is always a hot topic. One is being byproducts. So byproduct, it's been a massive misconception for a very long time. A lot of the misconception is they think it's the offcuts, whether it's the nasty parts of the, for example, animal, things that get thrown away. But it is not actually. So by definition, a byproduct is everything, for example, nutritious from the animal that is not skeletal muscle. So for example, if you're talking about a T-bone steak or a rump steak, that is basically the meat of the ingredient, but everything apart from meat, so for example, organ meat, so livers, kidneys, it can also be tendons, and it can also be bone, for example, carcass. These are very nutritious parts of the animal. It's in some cultures, I know in my culture, so I'm Eastern European, my mother used to cook up kidney every other day. I did not like it, but it's seen as very nutritious. Yeah, so other cultures find it, but it's also very nutritious. So, for example, glucosamine, you can't get glucosamine from muscle meat. You need to get it from dehydrated carcass. So things like, for example, the cartilage on the ends of bones. So it's a very high nutritious. And it's also to think about from a regulatory standards, pet food is regulated. So by definition, there's certain ingredients that we cannot use. So by AFCO standards, which Purina go by, and with the European Federation, a byproduct cannot contain any hair, hide, hooves, horns, teeth, beaks, and all the other nasty stuff, things like feathers. But the big question is byproducts. So in human food, you can also get byproducts. So a lot of people just think byproducts are in animal food. So byproducts in animal food is also seen as being environmentally friendly. So in the human meat production, so we eat a lot of A-grade meat, and a lot of the organ meat gets put into landfill, which is producing a lot of carbon emissions. So by actually utilizing that nutritious part of the animal, we're actually reducing a lot of waste that goes into landfill. So it's a very environmental thing to do, to utilize the whole part of the animal. But byproducts, you get it very nutritious. So I don't know if anyone's familiar with Vegemite. A lot of people hate it in Australia. A lot of people love it in Australia. But it was first made with yeast byproduct, which was fermented yeast. If anyone out there uses collagen supplement because they want their skin to be nice and elastic, not to get wrinkles, collagen actually comes from byproducts. So whether it's from marine collagen or whether it's animal collagen, for example, bone. Soups also, if you're a good connoisseur of food, for example, a good bone broth. So that again is used from byproducts, so bones. Whey protein. So if you love lifting weights in the gym, you're probably using a good protein powder to get big muscles. That is whey. So whey is actually a byproduct from milk production and cheese. And then if you love chewy lollies, that is also a byproduct if you think of gelatin. So next time you're going to be eating food, gummy bears, just think you're eating an animal byproduct, similar that goes into pet food, and that'll put you off candy. Okay, now last but not least, grains. So I love this topic because a lot of the myths that come into pet food, or for example, the trends that come into pet food, come definitely from the human side of things. So the myth on grains, being grains are, for example, a filler is not required in their diet, really stems from the human nutrition side of fads. So for example, paleo, which reduce grains in their diet. So grains aren't considered a filler. So if you think about what a filler is, it's something with no nutritional value whatsoever. So for example, if we put sand into pet food, then that would be technically a filler because there's no nutritional value. But grains have a lot of nutritional value. So everything from carbohydrates to essential nutrients to fiber. So for example, Dr. David mentioned earlier on, looking at good source of soluble and insoluble fiber. That is where you get fiber from grains, so whole grains. You get a lot of other nutrients as well, but also carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are a good source of energy. So with cats, they are obligate carnivores. So yes, they do need a high protein diet, but they do have the stomach enzymes to digest carbohydrates. And if you think about things like whole grain wheat, that they are actually really high. So up to 67% of whole grain wheat is actually complex carbohydrate. So it's a good source of carbohydrate with sustained energy. But then if you look at dogs are omnivores, so plant and animal products. It's a good source of energy for them. The other thing that is also not a good consideration is a lot of people will consider that grains produce allergies in pets. It is a bit of a misconception because if you look statistically, only about 1% of dogs are actually sensitive to a grain. And if you think about the grain, it's not the actual grain itself, but it's actually the amino acids. So it's the protein. So for example, soy or corn, but the percentage of those being sensitive to corn or soy is very low. So it's usually the protein from that grain that is causing the allergy. And I'm pretty sure from memory, there's one dog that is genetically predisposed, which is the Irish setter, which is predisposed to be to a grain. But last but not least, the last thing you can get from grain is protein. So if you're a vegetarian or vegan, a lot of people will go to grain for a protein source, or for example, a pea protein and things like that. Last thing I was going to mention as well, this is more from a marketing point of view. So for Purina One, Sue, hopefully she's listening. Yes, I've done my job. So this is if you bring an empty pack of Purina food to the nearest participating outlet, we can exchange it for a sample pack for free. And that is me done. Hopefully I'm done for time.
Thank you, Mr. Michael. Very good timing. Yes, no problem about that. Let's jump straight into the questions right now. For Dr. Daniel, I have a question for you. My rabbit constantly has a fever. How can I minimize it?
I need to know if the person was checking via an actual temperature gauging, a thermometer, or were they just feeling it?
Yeah.
We don't know. Okay, but generally, if your rabbit was hot to the touch, it wouldn't be something to be very worried about. But if it is abnormally, you take a temperature gun, you check the temperature, and you feel that, okay, look, this is not a normal temperature. I'll let you guys go online and find the normal temperatures for rabbits. It would be something to be concerned about. Okay, because the temperature range for a rabbit would typically be somewhere within what we would find for a dog as well. So anything above 39 would be something that we want to be considered, be worrying. At the same time, because they are housed in within the house, their air conditioning and stuff like that, their temperatures can range a lot as well. So they are not as, not as specific as dogs and cats. Their range is this, that's that. Now, for fever, if it's actually having an actual fever, it would most likely be an infection-based thing. Either that or, something like pancreatitis, like Dr. Lee mentioned, is now dogs and they have similar problems as well. But of course, the final solution is bring it to the clinic.
All right, good. Okay, thank you so much. Mr. Michael, a question for you. There are many types of fish examples, salmon, tuna, whitefish. What's the difference and which one's good for dogs?
You can't say one's good, one's bad. They've all got different benefits. So, for example, some are fattier fish, for example, salmon. So they all have their good benefits. So it's all about, again, looking for multiple protein sources to get good amino acid profile. So there's not one good ingredient. So they need to work in combination. So same with human. We don't just eat one ingredient all the time because it's better. We get a selection. So same with our fruit and vegetable, you need to get a good selection to get the right mix of vitamins and minerals. Same with protein sources as well. So salmon, good for omega fatty acids, omega anti-inflammatory, good for if you've got, for example, a dog with dry skin or cat with dry skin, that's probably beneficial, but you also need other fish as well.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Dr. Lee, a comment says, my Shih Tzu snorts loudly when breathing. Is it common?
There's a few there's a few reasons why Shih Tzu snores. From anywhere from body size to dog palate. So I think it's probably a good idea for you to get your resting rate and resting heart rate and then go to SAT so that they could find out for you. When they snore, it's good also to take video to show your vet how does that snore, okay? Because it does help in diagnosis as well. So when you go to your vet, they might need to do some other investigation like X-ray and other things to find out, like oral examination. Then they will probably advise you what to do. Okay?
Okay. In part one of our series, we spoke about CPR for dogs, and CPU for dogs, CPR for dogs. And Dr. Daniel, can we do that with rabbits? Can we help resuscitate our loved ones?
Yeah, it's definitely something that you can actually do, but the success rate is very, very much lower compared to dogs and cats with rabbits. Yeah, because generally when their heart gives out, it's usually an issue related to something else. So it's not necessarily a heart related issue like in dogs or cats. It could be so many reasons. That's why we usually, the first thing we always suggest for rabbits is when, say, a rabbit comes in recumbent, means it's lying on its side. The first thing we do is we establish an IV port. So the first thing is we place an IV line, and then we start pumping in fluids, and then we start doing everything else. So I think that's just basically, CPR is something, it's very typical to any other. I mean, now with YouTube, you can actually go online and find out CPR for rabbits. Okay, it's very typical to any other, like giving CPR for a puppy, where you actually hold the animal and you actually compress the chest. But the success rate, unfortunately, is not as good. They're just much more fragile animals.
They're really tiny. I
Yeah,
understand.
but drugs actually work very well. You can administer certain drugs to actually help restart the heart. We've actually had better success rate with those.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Michael. Is it advisable to feed my cat 3 times a day? My cat doesn't finish the dry kibble. I feed him. Is it just that he's picky, or should I be changing his diet? Maybe giving him wet canned food?
There's a lot of ways you can feed, so it really depends on personal preference and things like that. So cats need to graze, so cats are grazers. So you can feed dry, solely dry. You can feed wet and dry, or feed just wet. So, for example, for my cat, I feed wet in the morning, so one of their meals, and then I have a dry food that I leave out all day, and it grazes. So cats are, I guess, unique that way. The way they produce insulin, it's released all the time, so they need to be grazing all the time. I think I'm a cat because I eat all the time, but yeah, so ideally you want to leave food out for them to graze, and the best food for that is usually dry kibble, because it doesn't go stale, it doesn't go rancid. So wet, feed a little bit. The other thing to consider is also cats are very finicky eaters. Sorry so much for talking so much, but they can be seen as fussy. Their taste buds, they've got less taste buds than dogs do. So it's very important to make sure it's tasty. So making sure the food is enjoyable in their mouth. So wet is usually kind of their go-to. So other things is also how you also feed it. So if it's in I don't know if you can see my hand, if it's in a small bowl and it's a deep dish, if the cat's whiskers are touching the side of the bowl, the cat doesn't really like it. So there's a good chance they won't be eating it. If the water and the food are close to each other, they can cross-contaminate. So the water tastes like the food and the food tastes like the water. Then the cat will tend to not like both and not eat both. So they can be very fussy. And I guess it's genetically passed through. It's a survival mechanism. So if my food doesn't taste right, I'm not going to eat it because I might die. But yeah, so there's a lot of ways. So yeah, see what works. But just to kind of wrap that up, they need to graze throughout the day.
Fantastic. Okay, Dr. Lee, Shireen Wong, she would like to know a little further in English about reverse sneezing. She says her dog will have this sometimes.
Reverse sneezing is something quite common, especially for a dog, that means flat-faced dog. So how to differentiate whether it is a reverse sneezing? So at time we will do that to their nose, and then we see that whether they stop. So if you really see reverse sneezing, is something like so they do this body shaking with snorting. So you can find reverse sneezing video in YouTube. I think it's quite easy. So most of the time, reverse sneezing is something that it happens, but when it happens very frequently, Also try to look at their tongue and see whether it changes color. And you bring it to your vet and tell them the reverse sneezing, and also record it. Sometimes it is probably not the reverse sneezing, probably is a real asthmatic attack, which you do not know. So I think it's always good. Now our handphone is so readily available. So you just grab your handphone and then record that reverse sneezing episode and then show it to your vet to see whether it is a real reverse sneeze or something else.
Okay. It was a beagle she mentioned. She just did. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Right.
So thank you so much.
Bigger do that as well. Actually, all the dog can do that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing your topics today. Thank you so much for joining us on Pet Webinar. Thank you to our viewers once more for joining us for our part 2. And I hope you stay tuned to Pet Webinar as we continue to share great information from specialists and people who understand the industry and can really give you knowledge about your fur friends. Thank you for participating once more. Just to put it out there for Mr. Michael, Purina One is giving out 500 grams dry cat food for free. So now you can have a chance to do so as well. It's really simple. All you need to go down to the website. I'll put it on our website. You can just click on it. You can exchange your Purina packaging, minimum 1 kg, at any participating pet shop, and they will give you a 500 grams Purina One indoor kitten for free. Available now. Don't worry. I'll put it on the website. You can go and check it out. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us tonight. I look forward to seeing y'all again, hopefully working with y'all once more. I'm Heather Sue. Have a great evening. Stay safe and vigilant. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.
Thanks.